Indeed, in the 1930s, there were massacres around here. And in Queensland, they were called nigger hunts. And I've heard white men only 5 years ago recalling their days in the nigger hunts. And yes, they justified murdering us because we didn't use the land the way they did. And as I say, it was an utterly calculating attitude. They wanted our land, and to get our land, they had to get rid of us.
We had pride in the land because, you know, we have all our sacred sites, we have all our things in there. We live by the land. We don't go and destroy the land. The land is our mother. That's what we believe in. And if it's going to be taken away from us, it's like taking someone's life away.
If the non-Aboriginal people of Australia are willing to learn some of my grandfather's meaning for this country, then that may be able to give them some understanding what this really Australia is, what the history of Australia. Ned Kelly was only yesterday. You know, William the Conqueror was only yesterday. We got stories going back thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
The uniqueness of the Australian past has been concealed. In the dream time of the Aborigine, the land is sacred, the beginning and end of life itself. The European attitude to land, that of a commodity to be bought and sold, built on and exploited, is incomprehensible to a black Australian. This is the Obiri Rock, a cathedral of the spirit, east of Darwin. The significance of these paintings was only understood by Europeans as recently as the 1950s and 60s. These pictures were painted more than 10,000 years before the pyramids. They are older and more sophisticated than the cave paintings in France, by which the European tribes have measured their civilization. The World Heritage List now recognizes them as the oldest expression of human creativity. In other words, the longest historical record of any human beings. In recent years, white historians have made contact with people whose oral history includes record of the eruption of volcanoes 5,000 years ago. Many Australians are unaware of this. To them, the Aborigine is merely an object of pity, the poor old Abo. Many only see the frontier from their jumbo jet on its way to Singapore and London, although every summer they may feel it as winds from the deserts bring fires like this. These fires are unpredictable. They devastate the rural landscape and they reach into corners of gentility and incinerate without argument. Perhaps these fires, like the great droughts and floods, are reminders of the true nature of a country in which the majority of people may only be interlopers. The Aborigines not only survived, they developed a unique society and culture which those Europeans tied to racial stereotypes never saw or never acknowledged. Aborigines were presumed to be primitive and passive, at best noble savages, but none of this was true. In this ritual dance, for instance, the essence is humor, a put-on. In fact, they were more sophisticated than the invaders. They learnt languages better, they understood the environment better, and the civilized value of their one-family society often remained a puzzle to Europeans who were hardly civilized themselves, coming from a background of class division and brutal poverty. One European observer wrote that generosity seems so fundamental to the blacks that they have no word for thank you, nor did they have any concept of the extremes of wealth and poverty, nor were they able to fathom the invaders' idea of equality, that of freedoms negotiated between elites. The native Australians, wrote a colonial official in 1841, are a nation owning no chief, literally a pure democracy. A Victorian clergyman wrote, "The Aborigines don't seem to understand exalted rank. In fact, it's difficult to get into a blackfellow's head that one man is higher than another." In 1965, the non-people revolted. A young Aborigine called Charlie Perkins led both blacks and white students on freedom rides into the outback. The idea had come from the freedom rides into the segregated southern states of America in the early 60s, and this town, Moree, New South Wales, might well have been Selma, Alabama. Life was divided racially at almost every level. Here at the public swimming pool, where black children were banned, Perkins and his freedom riders were confronted by an angry white crowd. Then a black woman stepped forward and made a courageous speech in which she pointed to white men who had gone secretly with black women and had fathered black children. "Tell your wives what you've been doing," she said. "Go on, they're just over there, tell them." That evening, black children were allowed into the swimming pool. The fight back had begun. In 1967, a referendum was held which allowed the Aborigines to be counted as citizens in their own country. They could own property, they could get a job without permission, at least on paper, and they could vote. But for whom? For what? Political regimes in states like Queensland and Western Australia remained deaf to them. But what was changing, and dramatically, was the attitude of Aborigines themselves, many of whom now refused to play the part of mere victims in order to merit white sympathy and charity. Black Australians have tried many times to bring their case to the world, but their cry could not compete with the image of the lucky country. In 1982, the Commonwealth Games were held in Brisbane, Queensland, and the assembled international media heard ordinary, dignified voices of Black Australia, a nation they had not known existed.
Well, everyone else here today has brought along their flags of their country. And we're doing exactly the same thing. We're promoting our flag, the flag that we've chosen to follow, and we're displaying that. And there's no harm in doing exactly that. And we're going to sit it out quietly like the rest of them, enjoy the games, but display our flag, and that's what we're doing.
Around this time, the then Australian Prime Minister, Malcolm Fraser, was building a reputation as a champion of black rights in southern Africa. For the Aborigines, this presented a familiar irony. The Fraser government had consistently refused to use its federal power against repressive states like Queensland, whose premier accused communists of disturbing his otherwise happy poor old Abos. The truth was that the days of the poor old Abo had gone forever.